Wow.
Wow.
I'm consenting to be recorded, Roll.
Me too.
All right, so so this is part 2 of budgeting. And last time we told you basically what a budget was, and now we're going to talk about how to use it. So what is a budget? Does anybody remember what a budget is?
Tracking your money.
Yeah, it's a way to manage your money, right? And usually it's more formal, right? You write it down and you keep track.
Like planning.
And planning, good. All right. So the parts of the budget were the expenses. That's the cost that you pay out. The income is the money that you earn or that comes in. And then, like Kira just said, we have the plans. We have to plan, and we also measure the actuals, what actually happens, what we actually spend, and what we actually earn. Okay. And then what was a good reason to budget? Yaba, what was a good reason to budget? Why are you here?
To see if you meet all the goals that make up your plan.
Okay. All right. And why is that important?
Because you want to make sure that you're not spending more money than you're making or that you're bringing in.
Perfect. That is the perfect answer. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay. And let's, I think you guys might have talked about this last week, but is it hard or easy to do some budgeting?
Still for me is hard.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think Ann told me that last week. Somebody said that it's hard to get started, but then it's hard to keep going, right? Because you have to do it all the time. You have to do it every month. So yeah, it can be hard, but there are ways to make it a little easier, and we're going to give you all the forms so that you can do it on a form. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to talk about how to use a budget, how to fill in your own budget. So like I was saying, we're going to show you how to do it, and we'll show you some forms. You don't have to use those forms. You could do it in a notebook. You could do it on a spreadsheet. You could do it however works best for you, but there are certain things you want to keep track of. And then how do you compare your plan and your actuals? So just like we said before, is that you want to try to figure out how much you're going to need in your plan, and then how much you're really spending and earning in your actual, and whether you think you're planning well, and then you can make changes as well. And so assessing your budget, that means, is it a pretty good budget, or do you need to fix it and make changes to it? And then we're going to talk about setting goals, and goals are pretty important. And then to make those goals are things that you want to have happen. So you can change some parts of your budget and your actuals and your planning to make sure that you can get to where you want to be. And you can save more money usually. We're going to talk about that as well. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm going to go to the next slide. And when you're doing a budget, the first thing that you're going to do when you're getting started, this is getting started, is you're going to start keeping track of all of the things that you spend, all of your daily expenses. So you can do that when you pay cash. You just make a note of it. If you get a receipt, you can keep the receipt and then just write things down for the amounts. And that's important because sometimes we don't know what we're spending. It's just like money in, money out, and then we go, where did all that money go? So part of doing this is to figure out where you're spending money. And we talk about it for the expenses because usually your income, what you make money, is not daily. It's usually like every 2 weeks, every week or every 2 weeks usually, if you're at a job. So we'll talk about that when we get to the monthly part. but you're gonna write everything down. It doesn't matter how small it is. So you see the picture of the coffee? It doesn't seem like coffee's that big a deal, but it can add up. And, you know, we're gonna talk about how to do all of these things in a lot more detail now. And I'm gonna turn it over to Anne to get you started, okay?
Okay, so this is the first of several worksheets that we will be looking at today. And this is called our daily spending worksheet. So as Deb just mentioned, this is just where you keep a track of all your expenses. So the form has several columns or headings. The first one is the date. So you're going to put down the date of your expenditure. Then you're going to put what it is. So it might be grocery store, it might be new shoes, it might be prescription medication, it might be your rent. Doesn't matter what it is, you're going to put the expense type there. And then you're going to put the amount that you spend in either one of the last two columns. So which column you put it in is going to depend on how you pay for that expense. Okay, so under the first column, it says cash, debit card, or check. And under the second column, it says credit or charge card. So for example, if I pay my rent on the first of the month, I will put the first of, let's say July, I will write rent. And I pay that usually probably by check. So it's going to go in the first column under check and say it's $800. Then I write in there in that first column, $800. Okay, now on the other hand, if I go grocery shopping a day later, it's going to be the second of the month, it's going to be the grocery store. And that I paid by credit card. So that is going to go in the very last column there where it says credit card. And I'm going to put how much I spent. And maybe I spent, let's say, $52.48. I'm going to write that in there. Okay, and you're just going to keep this. Ideally, you're going to keep this for a month before you get started, and that will give you a good basis for doing the budget plan and then, you know, doing the assessment and everything else that Deb talked about. But this is just to get you started, okay, because most people do not very readily know what all their expenses are in the month. You'll know how much your rent is. You'll probably know how much your utility bills are. But some of these other expenditures, you know, many people do not know how much they actually spend on groceries in a month. So this is what you're going to start doing straight away. And you're going to write down every single amount of money that you spend as soon as you spend it. Okay, not when you get the bill. So if you get the credit card bill once a month, that's not when you're going to write down the credit card expenses. You're going to write down the individual items that make up the credit card bill the day that you spend them, okay? And as Deb mentioned, you don't actually have to do it on this piece of paper. Some people are very good with the computer and they can do it on a spreadsheet on the computer. Or what I like to do is buy a notebook and keep it all in a notebook, okay? That way I have all the months all together. So it's up to you, but this is the basic information that you're going to want to keep. Okay, and then on the next slide, here we have one filled in. And we took the example of a young woman called Gabi. So let's just have a quick look at Gabi's example here. She's filled it out for the first 12 days of January. And I'm going to show you just exactly what I just explained. So the first column, she puts the date. She bought several things on the 1st of January. So she lists them all separately. So 2nd of January, she bought some breakfast. She went out for that. She paid cash for it. Wasn't a very great deal of money. So she actually paid cash for it. And it was $7. Also on the 2nd of January, she bought some gas. And this she paid for with her credit card. Okay, so again, she's listing it as soon as she spent it, not when she gets the credit card bill at the end of the month. And also on the 2nd, she bought a birthday present for her mother because she knows how much her mother loves birthday presents. She wouldn't dare not do that. And again, She bought something that was $20, but she did put it on her charge card. Okay, so, and then you'll look down, you'll see it's exactly the same pattern for every single other thing. Okay, so we're looking at the date, the kind of expense, and how much she paid for it. Put in the right column as to how she paid for it, okay? And you're going to do that for at least a month before you try to get started with your budget plan. All right, so then on the next slide, so now I want to ask you, look at Gabi's daily expenses worksheet here and tell me, what are some of the things that she spends a lot of money on? And are some of these needs or wants? So what's one thing she spends money on, and is it a need or a want?
Okay.
Coffee? Did you say
Yeah.
coffee?
Yeah, she spends a lot of coffee.
She does, more than I would spend on coffee. And is it a need or a want, Kibra?
Say it again. I didn't hear.
Is it a need or a want? Does she need it or does she just want it?
Oh, I think it could go both ways, because sometimes I have to drink coffee to wake me up, so I need it. But instead of she going buying from the store, she can make it at home. It's be cheaper.
Exactly. So if she needs to cut costs, right? If she looks at this chart at the end of the month and goes, oh no, too much money spent. One thing she could certainly do is just make her coffee at home. I mean, that costs a few cents as opposed to going out and spending $3.50. And I'm sure some of us have sometimes spent even more than that on coffee.
Yeah.
Right. But so really, it might be a need for her to have coffee, but it's not a need for her to have coffee bought at, say, Starbucks, right?
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a want. So you're right. It might be a need, but it's also a want. And honestly, more of a need would be rent, right? I have to pay the rent. If I
Yeah.
have to live without coffee, then I have to live without coffee. Okay.
Yeah.
And are some other things? So Bava, what about you? What's another thing?
Gas for a car is a need.
Absolutely. So yeah, especially if she has a job and she needs to get to work, or maybe she has children, she needs to go pick them up from school. Yeah. So usually gas for your car is going to be a need. Absolutely. And do you think that she's putting quite a lot of money on her credit card?
Credit charge. Yeah, she's putting a good amount of her expenses on her credit card, not her debit. Her gas, her birthday present, her groceries, her clothing, her school supplies.
Right. So sometimes that's a good idea. And if you attended our credit card presentation, you'll know that what we aim to do is we absolutely aim to only put things on our credit card in the first place if it's an emergency, and then the second place if we can pay it off every month. If we continually have a credit card balance that's getting bigger and bigger, then we have to be looking at that very carefully, okay? But yeah, as long as she's paying it off every month, it's perfectly fine for her to put things on her credit card, okay? It saves her carrying around a lot of cash, for instance, or maybe using checks, all right? So it doesn't matter so much how she pays for it, as long as she is able to pay that credit card balance every single month. All right, so let's go on to our next slide. Now, why don't you go ahead and either of you give me an example of just, let's say, during the last week, one or two things that you spent money on. And did you spend like a reasonable amount of money? And how did you pay for it?
I put it on a slide, our expense last week. And I see my husband is spending a lot because he he eat breakfast at home. He start to work like 3 o'clock. Then he spend lunch outside. So I told him from now on, he's gonna take sandwiches instead of buying in that next team restaurant. So that's one tip.
Wow. Wow. You learn fast.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. That's really good, because that is an example of where buying lunch out is almost bound to cost you more than making a sandwich at home, right?
Yeah.
So very good. Bava, what about you? Is there any one expense that you had last week? Do you know how much it was? Did you need?
Yeah, I had to buy groceries and then like just other items that I guess would be considered as cosmetic, like lotion and a few things like that. And yes, it came out to be costly because it was about $225 or something. So
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Okay. So again, this is going to be really helpful, because sometimes like we're afraid of our bills, we're afraid of how much we spent, but it's so much better to write it all down. And then, as Deb said, and we're going to talk much more about later, is you will assess what you're spending and say, can I cut some corners here? Did I really need all this? Did I wait for the sale? Like, should I really have bought that yesterday when it's going on sale in 2 days' time, and so on? All right. So, but this is just making a start so that you're sure what's coming in, and more importantly, what's going out of your household budget. Okay, so now let's turn it back to Deb to talk about the budget.
Okay, so Anne talked to you about writing everything down on a daily basis. So like at the end of the day, you write everything down that you spent during the day. And then what we do is we roll it all up into a month. So we're going to take a month's worth and we're going to say, okay, the month is really important because a lot of times, remember we talked about that income. The income doesn't come in usually on a daily basis, unless you're like waiting tables or something. So we add up all of our income for the month. So if you get paid every week, you'll have like 4 weeks of pay and whatever tips you got and whatever other income you have. And I think we talked last week about all the different kinds of income you could have. So this is a very simple form, but whatever you're earning money at, wherever you got money from, if you got money from the government as part of the relief program during COVID, that's income because the government sent out checks for that. If you're picking up some unemployment while you're not working, that's income. If you have anything else that is money that you got from somewhere, that's what we put at the top part. And we're adding up all the things that happened in the month. And then you've been keeping track of the expenses and you add all of those up and you put them in the categories. And we talked about categories also. Categories are things that kind of go together. So if you have a lot of different groceries, but you bought them at Safeway and you bought them at Giant and you bought them at Harris Teeter and you bought them at Sam's and Walmart, all of those are groceries. That's a category, and you put that into your food category. You might, in Gabi's example, she did some eating at restaurants, and then she also was buying coffee. And like Kibra said, those are things that sort of go together because those are things that we wanted to do and we could have eaten at home, right? So she's making her husband take sandwiches so that he doesn't buy lunch outside because it's less expensive. Those are all things that when you put them all together, you can see how much you spent in the month. And then there are things like you're looking at like the rent or the mortgage. Those are the costs that you have to have for your house. And, you have to pay for water and gas and electricity. Those are utilities. You probably need to pay for phones. So whatever your expenses are, you put them in the categories and you add up everything that you did for the month and put it into the column that we call actual. Any questions on that before I keep going? No? All right. I'm going to keep going then. So then we're going to make a plan. So those were the actual things that you spent money on. And now we're going to start planning. Well, how do you make a plan? Your plan is what you expect for the future. So you're going to say, here's what I spent, and I think that I'm going to do the same thing next month, or I think I'm going to do something different next month. Or like if your income is going to change, if I'm getting a different job and I'm going to make a different amount of money, that should go in the plan that you've updated. So when you are when you're writing down what you expect in your budget plan for income and expenses, you make your best guess. Okay, it's not going to be exact, but you're going to get a chance to compare it later. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But what you do is you use your best guess. So if you don't know the exact amounts, you estimate. And that's another word for making a best guess. And then if the amounts are going to be different every month, and so there are people who, like if you are waiting tables or you're driving an Uber and you can't predict exactly, you can say, okay, one month I got $100 and the next month I got 50. So the average is in the middle, that's 75. And that's what you would budget because you don't know exactly how much it's going to be. And then in the plan, the first place that we look at that, we're going to look at it in the actual and the plan, but we want to see if it looks like there's going to be more income than expenses. So can we afford to pay for everything that's going to be in the expenses by the money that comes in our income? When we're predicting that, when we're putting together our plan, right? And so Biava said before, one of the good reasons to budget is to make sure that we can pay for everything that we want to have happen. We want to make sure that there's enough money for it, right? So now there's going to be the same categories, but you're also going to have a plan. So you're going to plan your income. You're going to plan your expenses. And you can see on this list of expenses, we had a few more things that we put in here, restaurants and takeout and clothing, and school supplies are a big one right now, but you're not going to have to do that every month, probably. You're probably going to have to get your kids ready for school, probably in the next month or two. And then you might have to do a little bit more when it gets to the next, like to January again. But you probably don't have to do it every single month. And so in your budget plan for the month, you can do different amounts for school supplies. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so we're gonna put together the plan just the same way that we did for the actual, and then we're gonna compare them. Okay, and Anne's gonna talk to you about that.
All right. So here we go, putting it all together. So this is the same information that we just showed you, but now we've put it all together. So this is called our budget worksheet. And you'll see it has the income, expenses, and then something at the bottom called net balance, which simply means you take your expenses away from your income. And you are really going to hope and work towards having a positive number left at the bottom, meaning that you have more income than expenses in a month. Okay, so the two columns at the end, one is our budget plan, which was on the sheet that Deb just showed you. And the other one was on the previous sheet is the actual. So here we go, putting both columns on the same sheet so that we can look at them side by side and compare them. And in a minute, we'll get to another slide where we add one last column, okay? So this shows us the totals at the bottom and at the midway point there, we have total income and we have total expenses, both from our budget plan and our actual. Okay, and then we net it out at the bottom, we take one away from the other. And we just really want to work towards, and we're going to discuss this more later, having a very positive number on the bottom, okay? If it's negative, then we really have to do something, make some changes. But also, if we're only just breaking even every month, that's not a very comfortable position to be in. So again, we're going to look at it and we're going to say, are there some things that we can change so that I have a little bit spare every month, or that I can start working towards some goals? And we will talk about that again later, but we really would like to see a little bit of a healthy balance in that net balance that is positive. That means that we are really doing well every month, okay? Not just scraping by or oh my goodness, not even making ends meet, okay? So on the next slide, we're going to add this one last column, and this says difference, okay? So now we have the budget plan and the actual, and then we're going to deduct one from the other and see if there's any kind of a difference, all right? And then right down at the bottom, we'll add all the figures up, and then we'll be able to see how well we did in planning, right? So the point of this is to show, do we think we're going to manage well each month? Do we actually manage well each month? And then we're going to ask ourselves, why is my plan different than what actually happened, okay? So the point of that is to make sure that when we're thinking about the upcoming month or months, we really want to try and make our plan as close to what is actually going to happen as is possible. Because if we're able to plan financially, then we're going to know what position we're going to be in. We're going to know if we're going to have any savings. We're going to know if we're going to be able to manage that little vacation that we wanted in August, right? And we're going to know if an emergency happens like car repairs, will we be able to cope with that, right? So the point of this is to show us, did we make more than we expected? So say, for example, we wait tables and our money is very different from week to week. You know, are we estimating accurately how much income we're going to have? Or are we falling very far short of our expectations, right? In that case, we need to do something about it. And are our expenses getting out of control? Okay, are we spending more than we think? Or really, do we need to cut our expenses because our income is still not keeping up with our spending? Okay, and then it's very important looking at this. The additional question you ask yourself is not just seeing there is a difference, but asking yourself why there's that difference, and then adjusting for it in the future on future budgets. Okay, everybody clear on that? So now we're just going to look at some figures on the next slide, just so it's really clear. So here we go back to our friend Gabi again. So let's have a little look at Gabi's budget. Okay, so in her plan, she thought her total income in the blue line there would be $2,700. She actually earned $2,800. So what she's doing is the beginning of the month, she's doing the budget plan. And at the end of the month, she's filling in the actual, and then she's also filling in the difference. So she earned more than she thought by $100. So in the difference column, she has more money coming in than she expected of $100. Now for her expenses, she had thought, so according to her budget plan column, that she would spend $1,850. Okay, she's still good. Like in her budget plan, she thought she would have a net balance at the end of the month of $850 at the bottom there. What actually happened was she spent ever so slightly less than that, and she actually only spent $1,845, okay? So in her actual, she was left with $955 at the end of the month. So again, if you go over to the difference, she spent $5 less than she expected. So that's also positive for her finances. So she had more income than she expected of $100. She spent less than she expected by $5. Those were both to the good. So we add them together, and she did better than she expected by $105. Okay. So her plan said she would have left at the end of the month $850. Her actual was $105 more than that, and she actually managed to have left over at the end of the month $955. So do you think that Gabi is doing well? Do you think she's managing well? Or do you think she's not managing well? What do you think?
She could have more for the, at least 10% for, she could have more. Yeah.
I like the way you think. Always aim higher. Yes. Yes, she could. But do you think that given that her income...
Oh, but she managed it okay, well though.
She's doing
Yeah. Yeah.
I think she's doing okay. I think
doing-
considering that her income is $2,800, she's saving almost about a third of her income, right? So I think she's managing pretty well. Of course, she could manage better. Everybody always could, but I think so far she's managing actually fairly well, right? She is keeping expenses under control, considering that she doesn't have an enormous amount of income. So yeah, and honestly, as long as you're starting off with a positive figure at the bottom, that's good. Like, don't beat yourself up. If it's a positive figure, you're off to a good start. We want to improve that, but we do want to always see a positive figure at the bottom, okay? All right, so on the next slide, now this is the word that Deb used was assess your budget. So that's what assess means is look at your budget carefully at the end of every month when you've put together that sheet we just showed you. And then going forward, say to yourself, for next month's budget plan, has anything changed, right? Do I need to change some budget plan figures? Do I still have the same job? Am I still making the same income? Will I have the same expenses next month? Or are there going to be some changes? For example, next month, I'm actually getting a new job. So it's going to pay me a little bit more, maybe 10% more. So I need to change my income for next month to reflect or show my new job income. Also, bad problem this month is my car is making a bad noise. And I know next month I'm going to need some car repairs, okay? My friend, the mechanic, already told me that he thinks that the carburetor might be gone, and that's not going to be inexpensive. That's going to cost a lot of money. So next month, I need to put in my budget plan that I need a new carburetor, okay? Also, my prescription cost just went up. It's the end of the year. So I need to add in an extra $22 for extra prescription costs next month, all right? And maybe, you know, it's the end of the year and I know that there's going to be an increase in my gas bill or my water bill, okay? So each month before you do your budget plan, you're going to take your existing budget plan, you're going to look at it and you're going to say to yourself for every single item, is this going to be the same next month or is it going to be different? And it may be different for some of the reasons that we just explained, Or it may be just generally that, my goodness, my children seem to be eating a lot more, and I really need to budget some additional money for groceries because I'm starting to spend more each week. I see that. Okay. So either I have to make some savings, or I do have to put in my plan that I'll spend a little more on groceries next month. All right. So is that very clear? We're going to take all those figures that we put together, and we're going to say to ourselves, why is there a difference this month? And do I need to change my budget plan for next month based on some things that I know about myself and my situation? All right. So we've covered a lot so far. So if there are any questions, feel free to ask me now. Otherwise, we'll go back to Deb to talk about goals.
All right, let's talk about goals then, because I didn't hear any questions.
Okay.
Anybody want to ask questions before we get started on goals?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about short-term goals and long-term goals. Short-term means soon. So when Anne just gave you an example of we're going to have to pay for some things on a short term, that means that it's like maybe next month or the month after, right? So an example would be that we're going to drive to visit my sister, or I need to get new tires for my car. And I know I need to get new tires because my tires are bald and it's not safe. So I know that I'm going to need new tires. I might be needing to move to a new apartment, and then I need to have a deposit, a safe deposit, the 1 month deposit or something. I might need some new furniture for that new apartment. So those are short-term goals. School supplies, we talked about school supplies. That's coming up pretty soon. And so we need to get our kids outfitted for school with all the right notebooks and pens and pencils and backpacks and maybe some clothing if they've outgrown their clothing, because kids do that. Because like Anne said, we keep feeding them. Okay, so does anybody have any short-term goals that they could share with us? Raul, do you have any short-term goals?
Mine would be property
Oh,
at some point.
okay. Biava, do you have short-term goals?
I have to take a recertification course, so I need
Okay.
to take and pass my recertification course.
Good, that's a good example. Kibra? Anything you want to share? Not right now? Okay, Saba, do you want to share anything?
Yeah, I'm looking good job.
Okay,
That's
all
my
right.
yeah.
Okay. All right, so now we're going to talk about long-term goals. Long-term means in the future. So that might be bigger things often. It might be like, I want to buy a new car. And that's a pretty expensive kind of a goal. I might want to take a vacation somewhere else. I might want to go visit my family in a faraway place. I might want to take a course. We talked about going to college or going to other trade schools or other continuing education, and they cost different amounts. But if you know that you have to be in school for a year or 2 years or 4 years, that's a longer term goal, right? And so what we want to do is we want to understand what some of those goals are and some of the things that we're trying to get to. And like Anne told you, when you're assessing your budget, is you have to see if you have money for it or not, or how you're going to get money for it. So it's important to have goals for short term and long term. And some of the things that we want to do, we want to make sure that we're saving for some of those goals. Like we talked about some of the things that we kind of want to put on the schedule, but we also need money for an emergency fund. So if you have to go to the doctor, you usually have to pay some money as a copay or some other part of the cost. If you need to fix your car, if you have something that goes wrong in your house and there's a plumbing problem. Those are all the things that we call emergencies, where we didn't really plan for it. It wasn't in our budget, but we have to pay for it. And we want to make sure that there's enough money set aside that we're able to do those things and pay for them without getting into trouble. Right? And, you know, we have to figure out how we get money for all of those things. And we're going to talk to you about how to do that now that there's a couple different ways. And Anne's going to tell you about it.
All right. So again, I can't tell you how important it is to look at that budget every month and make some decisions about whether you need to change anything. So usually the first thing that we are able to change is expenses. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to change our income because it might mean looking for a new job. That's a bit more complicated. It's much easier to save on our expenses by something like just cutting down on, you know, buying lunch out or buying coffee, or even making sure that our grocery shopping, that we take advantage of things like sales and coupons and stuff like that and keep our expenses down. Okay, so you will have looked at your budget and you will have seen, are you managing to cover your expenses? Okay, at a very minimum, you have to be able to cover all your expenses. If all you're doing is just scraping by, barely covering your expenses, then you also probably need to make some changes, okay? And there are some expenses that are very, very important and that you usually cannot change. So for example, your most important expenses are the expenses that enable you to live somewhere and that are usually job related, okay? So for example, most important thing for almost everybody will be the rent or the mortgage. If you don't pay that, you can't live anywhere. And then you're really going to want to pay the utilities, because wherever you live, you're going to need the things like light and heat or air conditioning, right? Or water sometimes too. Then also, you're going to need those job-related costs. Usually transportation is the most important one of those. And, you know, if we have children, for instance, we're also going to need transportation usually to pick up our children, to take them, you know, the places they need to be and so on. So transportation is usually very important. Doesn't mean it has to be a car. Sometimes, you know, maybe the bus or the metro is something we have to use for now. And any other job related costs, you know, so perhaps it's required that we have a uniform for our job and we have to pay for that. Maybe, you know, I know people sometimes have to have special shoes if they do certain jobs with special non-slip bottoms on their shoes, you know, so there are things that we sometimes have to buy that we need for our job. Okay, so all those are very important costs, and usually those are costs that are needs, not wants. And no matter how much they are, we have to afford those. And so we have to include those in our budget, all right? It's some of the other things that we can be more careful with and that we can actually look to change. So on the next slide, we'll see, here are some examples of some changes. So one of the things that you can do with your utility bill, and most utilities do let you do this, is they will let you pay the same amount. It's called a plan, an evening out plan. And they will let you pay the same amount to your utility company every single month. And then after 12 months, they will send you either an extra bill if it wasn't quite enough, or they'll refund you the difference if you paid too much. Okay, so this is one way that some people like to make sure that they know in advance how much their utility bill will be each month. Okay, because typically for the rest of us, in January, it's freezing cold. So our utility bill will need a lot of heat. Our utility bill will be high. In April, it's usually not too hot, not too cold. So that's, you know, usually April and September is when my utility bills are pretty low, right? Don't need a lot of heat, don't need a lot of air conditioning. But for example, in January and in August, I need a lot of heat in January, I need a lot of air conditioning in August. That's when the bills are much higher. So this plan, which most utility companies offer, you just have to ask them. It will let you even out your bills and pay the same amount every month for 1 year. And at the end of the year, they will sort out whether you paid too much or too little, okay? So that can be a very good tool for not having wildly different bills every single month, and also knowing with certainty what your utility company is going to bill you for the next month. So that's just something to think about. You can definitely reduce the cost of takeout foods and coffees, okay? And even if it means you change from, let's say, Starbucks, where I believe coffee is expensive, to say Wawa, where I believe coffee is less expensive. Okay, it's even cheaper to make it at home and take it with you, but you can always make some kind of adjustment to how much it costs you, all right? I personally don't drink coffee, so I don't know for sure, but I'm just supposing, okay? Somebody mentioned last time when we were talking about budgeting, another really good saving is look at what your TV is costing you, okay? Your kids might like the Disney Channel, but is it really worth the extra $10 or $20 per month? Which adds up to, oh my goodness, you know, between $100 and $240 for the entire year. So look really carefully at things like your TV and decide whether your children just need to, you know, read more books and not watch that Disney Channel. Okay, so think about that. Also make sure that you make yourself aware of any government programs or resources that are free or reduced cost. For example, you know, if you have a disability, you might be entitled to disability payments. If you're unemployed at the moment, you might be entitled to unemployment, but also the food stamps program called the SNAP, S-N-A-P program. And there are other government programs. So just make sure that, you know, you do apply for what you're entitled to. Now, what other things? I've mentioned a few things. Does anybody else have a suggestion for what else we might be able to change in our expenses? What else might we be able to look at and say, I could do better on that. I could definitely save some money there if I tried harder. Any suggestions?
Well, I found out during the whole pandemic that I was spending a lot of money when I was going out to eat that I didn't spend when I didn't go out.
Excellent. And one of the things I discovered was that I need to be more careful with my coupons. You know, I have a tendency to sort of rush to the grocery store, and I don't really plan before I go. So sometimes I'm in the store, like scrolling through my phone, looking on my app for coupons. And I really should have done that before I left the house to make sure that I have all my coupons ready and I know what I want to buy. Okay, so, you know, planning when you go grocery shopping is a huge way that you can actually save some money. You know, maybe buy some generic foods. Like, do you really need that Quaker Oats breakfast cereal? Or could you buy the Safeway's own breakfast cereal? Okay, which is almost bound to be a little bit cheaper. Okay, anybody else have any thoughts on that?
You mean to change my plan or my house? That's what you're asking?
Yes. So where else could you save some money? What else could you do?
Oh, she already saved money with her husband's lunches.
Yeah, still I need in here the government. I did apply. They didn't give it to me. For the insurance, I'm paying high, like 1,550. I paying this one. Maybe I'm gonna go more than I'm gonna ask them for that. Like the planning, I never had the planning because before I used to work, I used to make good money. I was a waitress. I got a tip, then I go, buy whatever I want to the cash. Like I don't feel like that's my income. I just, even I claim it, but I say, grocery I need, I buy another, I buy things. But now I don't have a job. That it depends on employment. That's why I want to reduce a lot of things because it's going like balance. Before I used to save before I spend, but now I cannot do that because I have a lot of expense. So now this one, the plan utility, definitely I'm gonna more work on that. And like food, oh my God, especially is a lot. Now that's what I have to save on that. And it was great for me. This is for me.
Right. So you mentioned a lot of things there. Yes. And all of these are really good things to do. And even with grocery shopping, it's not just one thing. It's a whole list of things. Make sure that you plan out your meals. That really helps you with, the worst thing that we do is impulse spending. Like I go in a store, I really think I need some new shoes. Why did I come out with the new shoes I needed, but also a pair of sandals for the summer and a new hat? That wasn't well planned, right? Same in the grocery store. Be very careful that you only buy the things that you really think you're going to use for the month, and make sure that you before you go in the store, look at the sale flyer. Make sure that you buy some things on sale, stock up on things on sale in your freezer. All these are really, really good ways to make savings on expenses. And you will think of many more as the weeks go by, because you will become much more aware of what you're spending. Okay, so very good. All right, and let's just quickly then talk about changing our income. So again, this is sometimes a little bit harder because it's a bigger thing to do, but we can make some changes to increase our income. For example, we could maybe change our job, or if we're only working a part-time job, maybe we could, or even a full-time job during the week, maybe we could find a place that needs our help on a Saturday morning for a few hours and have ourselves a little Saturday job. We could maybe ask our employer if we could have some more work hours, right? Maybe we're only working 24 hours. Maybe he could bump that up to even 27 hours, right? And again, look into government programs. And if you don't hear back from them, in a timely fashion, chase them up, but try and really apply for everything that is available to you. So, as Kibra just said, there are some things that we could change for income. If our circumstances change, we have to think of these new things. And I think the last time somebody mentioned, maybe doing some odd jobs for a couple of your elderly neighbors who might be willing to pay you to do some yard work. Maybe it's September, they have leaves everywhere, and they would give you a few dollars if you just cleaned up their yard for them, so maybe you could do that. So a lot of things to think about there, okay? But it's definitely all about making those changes so that our plan is a great plan and we know we can get by. Okay, so with that, back to Deb.
Okay, so let's talk about goals again. So we talked about some goals, right? Some short and long-term goals. So Raul wants to buy some property and Biava wants to take a course. And we have to decide what's really important. So remember, some of our goals could be things that we want and they're less important than the things that we need. So if you need certification, that's really important. And you want to make sure that that's one of the things that you really aim for. How do you do this? Well, you try to fit the goals into your budget. And a lot of times we're going to say, we can't do it all in 1 month. And so we figure out what it costs. And then we say, how many months do we think it would take to save up for that? And then we figure that out and then see what we can change in the budget. So we've talked a lot about changes in the budget, right? You cut some expenses or add some income, you know, maybe you go drive Uber for a month or something. But let's just talk about how to do it. And this is an example because we like to give you examples with money in it. So Anne needs new tires for her car. And she needs it in 3 months because she knows that she could probably get by for a while, but then she wants to take a big road trip and she wants to have new tires before she gets on a big road trip. And the new tires cost $300. So if we have 3 months to do that and they're $300, it costs $100 a month that we want to try to save so that when we get to the 3rd month, when we get to September, that she can pay for all the $300 and she already has the money saved. Okay, and so then she would go and she would say, what are the things I can change in my budget so that I can save another $100 a month? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So all those changes that we just talked about, they could be bigger, they could be little, but remember some of the little things really add up. So, you know, if you go to the grocery store and you always buy tons of cookies and candy, maybe that's something that you could stop doing as much of. Or, you know, maybe the coffee thing. It doesn't have to be at Starbucks. Whatever it is, you know, I saved a lot of money because I didn't go out to eat at restaurants because it was a lot cheaper to cook at home. So those are all things that you can think about. But if you know how much you need to save for your goal, it will make it easier. So there are a lot of people who do this for Christmas presents. They say when I get to Christmas time in December, I know I'm going to be buying presents. So there's 2 ways I could do it. I could buy a few things every month and put them in a closet so that I don't have to spend it all in December. I can spread it out. Or there are other people who say, I'm going to put money away. I'm going to put $20 a month every month. Just put it away and not think about it. And then at the end of December, then I have $240 already saved up for Christmas presents, and I don't have to wonder about where the money's going to come from. So all of those things for goals are some of the things that you want to try to plan for and budget for those goals. Does that make sense? Everybody understand that? You have any questions about that? No questions?
Thank you.
Very quiet today. Very quiet today. Okay, so what again, this is just repeating what we said before. You need to save for goals, but you also need to make sure you have money for those emergencies that we call emergency funds. So if something bad happens where you know you have to pay money right away, you need to have money put aside. So for instance, I'll give you a for instance, I have a part of my house where the roof is that some birds made a hole and they're making a nest in there, and I'm going to have to call somebody to fix that wood that's in my roof so that there's not a hole anymore. I wasn't planning for that. I didn't know that was going to happen. Those pesky birds came and did that, but now I'm going to have to pay somebody to do that because it's up very high and it means it's carpentry work to fix it. And I'm going to have to call somebody to do that. So I had to have money that I have in my emergency fund that I'm going to use to pay for that. And the goals should be important things. And we talked a little bit about this too. So, you know, if you need to go back to school, you need to save some money for that. You need to know how much it's going to cost. If you went to the the talks that we did about continuing education, there's usually a cost to take a course, but then there's also costs to buy the books. And so you need to know how much it's going to cost you, and then you need to plan for it. And when you plan for it, then you're going to measure yourself, your actuals against your plan, like Ann showed you, and just make sure that it's lined up and that you're planning well. And it's not just the things that we'd like to have. So, you know, sometimes we would like to have those new shoes or that new clothing, and we don't really need it. We just want it. And that's a place to save money. So you want to make sure that what you're saving for is important to you. And some of those things that we spend money on, we think, oh, I would really like it at the time. And then later we go, why did we buy this? So you want to think some of those things out. And like Ann said, if you're planning on things, you probably are spending money better than if you just are going things and buying them on impulse. Impulse means I saw it, I want it right now, and I haven't thought about it a lot. Okay? So as you become more successful, as you figure out how to pay for all of these things that you're starting with, and you get better and better at it, you can add more goals. Or if you have really big goals, like you want to buy a house or you want to buy a car, those are usually the most expensive things that we can do. And you might have to save for a while to get to that point. And again, the budgets will help you understand how you're spending your money and how you pay all your expenses so that you don't get behind. And then also how you can make some changes when you see how you're spending your money. It's easier to see where the things are that you can change than if you don't keep track. Okay? Any questions about that one? And we made this thing in here that says start now. Start now. Okay. So Ann's going to review with you, and then we'll take more questions if you have any.
All right, thank you, Deb. So what we talked about today was building on what we talked about last week, how you can actually use a budget and why it's worth doing the work that goes into making a budget plan. We showed you how to fill in the figures. And I just want to point out here, this is an example. Everybody's income and expenses will be different, okay? So we put here some categories or some items that may apply to you or may not apply to you, okay? So for example, most people do pay rent or a mortgage, right? Most people buy groceries. Not everybody has children, not everybody has school supplies, but you may have other categories, okay? So you may have, you know, we have on here some general things like the bus, the metro, utilities, cell phone. This is some of the more common expenses, but you may have different expenses that I don't have, or that, you know, maybe Bava has expenses that Kibra doesn't have. So this is an example of the form. You are going to build on that form and put spaces for your own categories, okay? So we showed you how you compare the budget plan, which is the first column, with the actual. And this is usually done monthly. So your budget sheet will be done monthly. You fill in the budget plan at the beginning of the month. You fill in the actual figures the end of the month. And then at the end of the month, when you've got those two columns filled in, then you fill in the column that says difference, okay? And then you assess. So now all the figures are in, now we're going to look at it, and we're going to say to ourselves, do we need to change something here? Am I managing at all? Am I managing well? Could I manage better? Okay, and you're going to assess what you can do, which most often begins with cutting expenses. Okay, asking yourself, are these all needs or are these actually just wants and I could cut back? Okay, you're going to be meanwhile thinking about your goals, your short-term goals, that vacation I want in 3 weeks' time, or your long-term goals, I want to go back to college. Okay, and then you're going to make sure that somewhere in there you start being able to manage well, and then you can add another category, another line to fill in a plan for some savings, and especially savings towards your goals, or as Deb pointed out, the other really important thing that you need some savings for is that emergency fund. Okay, we all have emergencies. Like, we need to plan for that. That really helps us to live a more stress-free life if we have some savings. Okay, so it's really important to do the budget, do it carefully, and look at it at the end of every single month and make a really good plan based on what happened and what will happen. Make that plan for the next month. Okay, so we hope that this was a good talk for you. The two presentations showing you not only why it's important to do a budget, but also how you can most easily do it, and showing you what it's very important to look at as your budget goes along. Okay, very, very important tool that I think far too many people just try and live, you know, paying a bill as it comes in without ever really looking at the bigger picture and saying, am I managing well, or do I need to make some changes? All right, so now is the time. If you have any final questions or comments, we would love to hear them.
Was this helpful?
Very helpful.
Yes, very.
Very
Are there things that you'd like to do now that you've been through this presentation?
Make a budgeting plan sheet.
helpful.
Okay, good. Good for you.
Very good, very good. And honestly, it will help. People that I know that have started doing this have been really happy. They've said one thing to me over and over, which is now they feel they have control of their money, which is really important.
All right, so it's back to you, Raul.
All right, everybody. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much.
This,
Thank you.
This is the end of our workshops for now.